first speaker is Scott Powers and Ron Yurko from Rice University and Carnegie Mellon University, and their talk is titled Swinging Fast and Slow.
Yeah, you like that title? Thanks. Okay, so back when I was working for the Dodgers, sometimes in my personal life, I would go and do social events like a barbecue or something. And because there's nothing about me that makes me interesting to talk to at a party, beyond the fact that I work for a baseball team, the conversation tended to steer in that direction. And I remember once at a barbecue, I met a Dodgers fan who became a new friend. Maybe some of you who are working with teams can relate to this experience, but every time a Dodgers batter struck out in a high-pressure situation, I would get a text from this new friend complaining to me about how batters just didn't have two-strike approaches these days. His position was, and I think this is more and more common as the strikeout rate is increasing in baseball, the position was that batters need to adjust with two strikes and just get the ball into play. I personally was always very agnostic on this question because I don't know what's going on between the batter's ears, and if they were to change their approach, I don't know what consequences there would be in that. So that's the research question that we're trying to address today, which is first, how much do batters adapt their swing based on the count? How much do they change their approach? And then what are the consequences of these changes? So I'm just gonna make some real quick talk and jump right to the conclusions, or at least give you a preview so you have a sense of what to look for. So the first thing is I'm going to introduce this concept of the batter's intention, which is going to be a useful way for working with the new swing tracking data that are available. And through this framework, we're going to, first we're going to observe that yes, batters are able to reduce their strikeout rate by modulating their swing length and bat speed based on the count. But with the trade-off of the increased contact and reduced power, it's not clear this is actually a good thing, at least from a linear weights perspective, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But first, let me just introduce the data. In May of this year, Major League Baseball released publicly an awesome new data set, where we're now getting for every single swing in Major League Baseball, the swing length and the bat speed measured at the point of contact. There are some additional derived metrics, squared up rate, fast swing rate, blast, and swords. And these are either unavailable at the swing level or are simply derived from the two metrics of swing length and bat speed. And MLB did hint that there's more coming in the pipeline, which is very exciting. So if there's one takeaway I want you to have from this slide, it's thank you MLBAM, or thank you BAM for making the data available. Do we have any BAM reps here? Shanna, thank you. I would not be on this stage if not for what BAM were doing making the data publicly available. Okay, so with these data, the naive question that you might ask is, when batters swing faster or swing slower, do they make better contact? So we're going to measure contact quality just with a simple binary, was the ball squared up or not? And here's the distribution of bat speed. On the top, we've got contact that's squared up. On the bottom, we've got contact that is not squared up. And what we see is actually bat speed is a little bit higher on average for balls that are squared up. So this is a little bit counterintuitive, but it comes with two cautions. The first of those cautions is the classic correlation does not imply causation. So, a natural mental model that you might have here is that the swing metrics cause contact quality. But if you stop and think about it, maybe a more realistic mental model for the causal relationships here is that there are these confounders, such as pitch recognition and batter timing, and they cause both the swing metrics and the contact quality. So thinking back from that example from the previous slide, you can imagine that if a batter is expecting one pitch and gets another one, they might slow down their swing to try to manipulate where that barrel is coming through the zone. And so that could cause their swing to slow down, and it could also cause their contact rate to be lower. So we'll need to be careful about this. And here's the outline of, I forgot, that's caution number one. Caution number two is about how are we measuring, how are we getting these measurements? It's at the point of contact, which means that for two identical swing mechanics, if the first swing is early and the second swing is late, we're going to be measuring bat speed and swing length at different points along bat path, as illustrated here. The late swing is going to have a shorter swing length measurement, so the measurements are different despite the fact that the swing mechanics are identical. And so we need to think about these swing metrics as an outcome and not purely a process. But here's the outline for the talk today. I'm going to introduce this intention model that we're going to use to reason about these swing metrics. And out of that, we're going to classify variation in swing metrics into three categories: approach, adaptation, and timing. So approach is the extent to which count explains variation in swing mechanics. Adaptation is the extent to which pitch location explains that variation. And then timing is the remaining unexplained variation. So we're going to dig in on approach in particular, because that helps us answer that research question that I proposed at the beginning of the talk. But first, the idea behind the intention model is that we want to know when a batter is swinging right, like when they're hitting the ball like they want to, what are their intended swing metrics as a function of the count and the pitch location. The hypothesis here is that the batter is trying to hit the ball at a certain spot, okay? And sometimes they're going to be early, sometimes they're going to be late, but they've got a spot where they're trying to hit the ball. And so in order to estimate that, we're going to fit a model where we condition on good contact. We're going to condition on the ball being squared up. So that's our intention model. We filter out some, just do some data cleaning to get rid of bunts, check swings, and then we're filtering on squared up contact. And then separately for swing length and for bat speed, we're going to fit mixed effects linear regression, where, for example, here is our regression for swing length, where we've got fixed effects for balls, strikes, pitch locations, and then we've also got batter random effects. So the betas here are the fixed effects, the gammas here are the random effects. We've got random slopes for balls, for strikes and pitch locations for each batter. So we're learning for each batter a slightly different relationship between count and pitch location and these swing metrics. And so the part of this model that's explained by count is what we're calling approach. That's going to be different for every batter. And the part that's explained by pitch location is what we're calling adaptation. So for example, approach. Here are the results where each circle is a batter. The x-axis is how much are you adapting your swing length as the number of strikes increases. And the y-axis is how much are you adapting your bat speed. So we see that for the most part, everyone is either maintaining their swing length or reducing it, similar with bat speed. But there's a difference. We see a difference where some players are making a bigger approach change as the number of strikes increases, which is consistent with what other people have found in the public space. So this is interesting. We'll come back to this in a minute, but I want to move on to the second component, which is adaptation. And I figured the best way to show it was with two extreme examples. Here we've got Nico Horner on the left, Juan Soto on the right, and I'm showing you the predicted intended swing length as a function of pitch location for these two players. So Horner, when he's hitting the ball right, when he's making good contact, that swing gets up to 8 feet for pitches down and away, but for pitches up and in, it's as short as 6 feet. Whereas for Juan Soto, it's pretty consistently 7.5 feet across the board. Now, anytime you see like Juan Soto on one end of something, there's a temptation to think, oh, well, it must be a good thing. But honestly, it's difficult to interpret what's going on here. There's clearly a difference between Horner and Soto, but we don't know where the contact point is. We don't know the contact depth of these swings. So we don't know whether these changes in swing length are coming at the front end or the back end of the swing. So I'm just gonna leave this one here for now. And I want to talk about the last component, which is timing. So now we're going to take all of the swings, not just the ones that were squared up, and we're going to use our intention model to predict swing length and bat speed, and we're going to look at the residuals of those predictions. So we've got the predictions on the left, and this makes sense. We got swing length on the x-axis, bat speed on the y-axis, and we see that relationship. Generally, the way that you generate bat speed is with a longer swing. What I want to bring your attention to is on the right here. We've got this interesting shape where first it goes up, and then it goes down. And so I think what we're seeing here is tracking the path of the bat as it comes through the zone, where as the batter is approaching the point of contact, the bat is accelerating until just beyond the intended point of contact, and then it starts to slow down as the batter finishes their swing. So to me, this figure on the right, this here is like a smoking gun that our intention model is picking up on something significant because of the evidence that we see here. I think this is evidence that the residual here is mostly timing because of the shape that we're seeing. So you'd hope that if we're measuring timing this way, then we'd look at the players who have the smallest variance in timing, and those would be good hitters. And we look at the hitters who have the biggest variance in timing, and those would be bad hitters. So we took a look at that result, but honestly, those results didn't really pass the sniff test. And I think that's because there are other sources of variation here, which I won't get into this one, but this one, timing as well, we're gonna kind of leave it here and focus back to that original research question about approach. So I've shown you that there are differences between batters in terms of how their approach changes as a function of the count. A natural follow-up question is, what are the consequences of these approach changes? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a pitch outcome model that predicts just for a league average hitter based on the pitch trajectories, the outcome of that pitch. I presented this model last year at Saberseminar. And what we're going to do is we're going to update that model knowing now what this batter's estimated approach is as a function of strikes. So in detail, what that looks like is we start with our pitch outcome model, and then we're going to update three of the components. We're going to update the contact probability, the fair probability, and then the expected ex-woba condition on contact. We're going to update them using, for example, with the contact probability model, it's a logistic regression for making contact where we've got an offset, where p hat is the predicted contact probability from the original pitch outcome model. We start with that offset, and then we make a linear adjustment, linear in the log odds space, a linear adjustment based on the batter's approach in terms of their swing length and their bat speed. So here, gamma is the batter random effect that we estimated from the intention model, which says how much are you adapting your swing length? How much are you adapting your bat speed as the number of strikes increases? And then the betas that we're learning here are, okay, so what is the effect of those approach changes on your contact probability? So for those of you who are familiar with causal inference, you can think of this as an instrumental variables regression, where our instrument is the number of strikes in the count. And that's how we're getting at a causal effect here. We can take a look at the results. So here, every dot is a player. To orient you, the right column is bat speed, the left column is swing length. And then the top row is contact probability, how that changes. The bottom row is expected ex-woba, how that changes. So in particular, focus on the top right, that top right figure. What we see is that the more you are slowing down your swing as the number of strikes increases, the higher your contact probability. You can get to, in terms of making no change versus the most extreme changes, we're talking about a swing in like 8% contact probability when we include this additional information in the model. So it's clear that this is an intuitive result, right? By slowing down your bat speed, you can make better contact. And then down below for expected ex-woba condition on contact, this is exhibiting the trade-off that we see in power. And again, these results make intuitive sense. The more you're slowing down your bat, yes, it increases your contact, but it reduces the power that you're able to get when you make that contact. Perfectly intuitive. And you see a similar relationship, although certainly less stark, on the left side of the slide when we talk about swing length rather than bat speed. So these are the consequences of the approach changes. And now the natural follow-up question is the trade-off worth it? Is it worth sacrificing contact probability, or sacrificing power to increase your contact probability? And you can imagine this makes sense, right? As you get deeper into the count, early in the count, making weak contact is worse than swinging and missing. You'd rather swing and miss. But later in the count, you'd rather make weak contact instead of swing and miss. The question is, at what point does the trade-off become worth it? And that's where we get into, in order to roll these pitch predictions up into plate appearance predictions, what we need is a Markov chain model for the outcome of a plate appearance. The way that we get that is we've got these pitch outcome probabilities, and we're then calculating the probability of each possible terminal outcome of a plate appearance and assigning a linear weight to that outcome, including using the expected actual condition on putting the ball in play when the ball gets put in play. So we roll it up, and now we're able to measure these consequences on a run scale. And so we're going back now to that figure I showed you with different batters' approaches. But the difference now is that I've introduced this gradient, which tells you like the run value of this approach if we take an average major league hitter and we apply this batter's approach to that average major league hitter. So the first thing I want to point out here is that the scale is pretty compressed. Okay? From the most extreme to the least extreme effect, we're talking about a difference of 6 runs per 500 plate appearances, which is not very many. So it's a pretty small effect. The second thing I want to point out is that ideally what would happen is that you would reduce your swing length without reducing your bat speed too much. And there's one outlier in particular who stands out as doing a good job of this. That's Julio Rodriguez. So to orient you to some of the other names on this list, Anthony Rizzo and Nico Horner make pretty big adjustments as the number of strikes increase. Adley Rutschman is sort of the opposite end relative to Julio Rodriguez, where he's cutting back on his bat speed a lot, but not so much on his swing length. And so from the work that we've done, that seems like not a good trade-off for the average hitter. McCormick makes very little change to his swing length, and Yandy Diaz makes very little change to his swing length or to his bat speed. Because we're always curious where Juan Soto comes out. He's actually more toward the middle of the distribution here. He's relatively average in terms of how he changes approach as the number of strikes increases. So to follow up, to remind you of those conclusions, the first is that this idea of estimating the batter's intention is really useful for working with swing metric data, swing tracking data. And remember that smoking gun plot I showed you that convinces me that we really are separating the measurement noise of timing error from what the batter is actually trying to do. And then using this framework, we showed that it is true that the batter can cut down on their strikeout rate. I didn't show you strikeout rate because we only got so much time, but obviously this is something that we checked. With that increased contact probability comes a reduced strikeout rate. Okay. But the trade-off for power means that it's not clearly worth it for batters to change their approach in this way. So I'd like to acknowledge Nick Wan and Noah Woodward for correspondence and discussion on earlier versions of this work that led to improvements. And I've got our code and these slides up at that GitHub repo. And down here, I've got my website and Ron's website if you'd like to learn more about our work. Thanks for your attention.